In today's novel, this is a weapon. Stronger than slavery, stronger than a gun. In American history, literacy has been forbidden from the wrong people. Women were restricted, books were inaccessible to the poor, and enslaved people were denied reading and writing. Readers of the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass may remember the Great Order's accounts of hiding his lessons from white folks. Or you may recall in the same text the transformation of a Mrs. Auld who begins teaching a young Douglas his letters and then, after her husband warns her of the danger, turns on the child. In Percival Everett's James, this is the weight his protagonist carries when he holds this most dangerous weapon. And for this reason, another man is whipped for picking it up. Why take such measures to outlaw literacy? Because an institution like slavery stamps out the things that threaten it. And an enslaved man who could read and write breaks an important belief: that he is somehow lesser. Literacy exposes that lie. Nowhere is this broken assumption more apparent than in a beloved character America already knows, Mark Twain's Jim. His fame reaches across generations. He's iconic, but he's also a lesson a whole country has absorbed. It's a history we know. Despite evidence to the contrary, inferiority is still written into the retellings of American slavery. So, Everett picks Twain's famous The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn as the site where he confronts this hidden bias. Official history, the kind that's in the textbooks, acknowledges that slavery was evil, as it should, and that all people are created equal. But many accounts quietly signal that enslaved people were somehow lesser. Everett exposes that gap by rewriting literature's most famous enslaved man as what he always was underneath the performance, the most fully realized mind in the book. So, let's go to the place where Everett begins. Before Huck and Jim escape, before the river, and before the plans, he opens by teaching us how to read. He does it with a language lesson to children. Quick note, in case you missed it the first time, the book is James by Percival Everett, the 2024 National Book Award winner and the 2025 Pulitzer Prize winner. This is a deep dive, which means full spoilers, including the ending. That'll be the pattern for deep dives on this channel. We actually can't close read a book without discussing the whole thing. So, if you haven't read James yet, go ahead and read it. It'll take you a weekend, and this video will still be here when you get back. In the second chapter, James gathers children around the cabin and teaches them their lines. Specifically, he teaches them how to speak to white people, and he tests the group on what he calls situational translation. As with any technical term like this, it establishes James's credibility, and actually more than that, he assumes the kids already get it, which tells us in technical terms they've been doing this for a long time. This is a custom. James explains to the children, white folks expect us to sound a certain way, and it can only help if we don't disappoint them, I said. The only ones who suffer when they are made to feel inferior is us. Perhaps I should say when they don't feel superior. And the lesson goes on. You're walking down the street and you see Mrs. Holliday's kitchen is on fire. She's standing in her yard, her back to her house, unaware. How do you tell her? The youngest of them, lean and tall, 5-year-old Rachel, says, "Lordy, miss'm, looky here." "Perfect," I said. "Why is that correct?" Lizzie raised her hand. Because we must let the whites be the ones who name the trouble. And why is that, I asked. February said, because they need to know everything before us, because they need to name everything. Everett's short sense of humor highlights a contradiction between the implicit cultural requirements placed on enslaved people and also the assumptions about their intelligence. The fact that James and others achieved such an adept level of sensitivity and adaptation actually belies an expert and intellectual fluency. Far from being a fiction, this describes actual history. Enslaved people had to be bilingual. They had to walk in several worlds at once. But slavery required their dehumanization, and it disallowed white folks from acknowledging minds that they required had to adapt to the necessity of living in multiple languages and multiple realities. I believe that's what they call irony, which is perhaps why, during a later conversation in the same chapter, James and another man appear so expertly literate in the fine details of irony. The scene with the children is an immediate note on their young indoctrination into a culture of fear and on their urgency to mask. It shows us how quickly these children had to learn the danger around them. In this instance, Everett does a couple of things. The children are instructed to translate downward, which is to hide the real selves only other Black people know. This tells us that dialect is not a native language. It's actually acquired. First, think about what that means for James and his representation in the original Huckleberry Finn. Twain wrote his Jim's language as the undiluted speech of a man. But in Everett's approach, the dialect is a performance, an invented survival language. Second, James is bilingual, not monolingual. This puts him at an advantage. The enslaved people are the sophisticated linguistic actors. The white folks are the ones who never realize the secrets being kept and spoken right in front of them. There's a mask that separates white and Black right out in the open. The leap from speaking to reading and writing is the next stage in James's progression, the one that ultimately leads to a critical literacy and to his naming. First, James finds books among the robbers' booty. They include Voltaire, Rousseau, and reading them produces a new hunger, not just to ingest ideas, but to write his own down. Which brings us back to this. James meets the consequences of literacy when he tries to procure a pencil through a group of enslaved men he meets. They're out foraging for food. James asks for a pencil from them. The men, impressed that he can write, realize the broader potential of his literacy. A man, young George, implores him to write his story. When young George returns to him, he proudly hands over a pencil and then disappears quickly. So James writes, and triumphantly, at the beginning of chapter 16, he declares one of the book's best lines. With my pencil, I wrote myself into being. I wrote myself to hear. The pencil gives James the tool to affirm his identity and his place on earth. But James won't escape the consequences. The system answers back, and it answers in public. James can already reason and speak at a high level, and his mask slips in front of white people actually several times during the book. So why does the physical evidence of literacy merit such harsh public punishment? Because speech is temporary. It's ephemeral. Reading and writing stay. Writing is evidence of thought. A person who writes produces a permanent record. And a system built on the illusion of inferiority cannot stand against the evidence that disproves it. His ability to write physically creates material from his thoughts. And since that material persists, it is a record of his living. It is his mind and his personhood in physical form, on the page, brought into his existence. Afraid of the consequences for the men who helped him, James expresses concern over their danger. A man named Old George answers him, "No whipping in the world can undo the hope you will give us." Their hope is almost immediately tested, though. James eventually watches young George's punishment from a periphery of a clearing. The overseers have gathered the whole plantation to see it. He's an example, a lesson for others about what happens when a black man dares to threaten slaves' hierarchies with this simple thing. And notice what that staging tells you. This isn't justice, it's instruction. You don't gather a plantation to watch something harmless. The severity of the punishment measures the threat. It's the institution telling you, and the only currency it has, exactly what it thinks that pencil is worth. In the pencil episode, we can see this development. James breaks down the ideas in his books and finds the means to differentiate between worlds like enemy and oppressor. He says, "And then I understood that I recognized the book as a tool of my enemy. I chose the word enemy, and I still do, as oppressor necessarily supposes victim." The language and the concept go hand in hand, he finds. By developing one, connections between the others follow. He becomes literate not just as a means of reading and writing, but a means of understanding the symbols that built structures and the structures that built a world of slavery. That distinction, enemy rather than oppressor, is the book's thesis in miniature. James's literacy extends into metaphorical territory. This is an idea he borrows from the African American literary canon in Frederick Douglass. Like James, the early chapters of Douglass's narrative stages a Bildungsroman. You may remember it from that last episode. Douglass moves from illiterate to literate. Literacy, in fact, helps him make connections and delve into the heart of things. More than understanding books, he develops the ability to read the world and slavery's distortion of it. Like Douglass before him, James stretches the meaning of reading and writing beyond its literal bounds. A key moment in his development comes a little bit earlier in the novel, when he's bitten by a snake and begins hallucinating the major Enlightenment philosophers. During the dream, he imagines a conversation with Voltaire, Locke, and Rousseau. Primarily Voltaire, though. It's not a mistake that these are the foundational philosophers who sparked the American Revolution, or at least the ideas of the American Revolution. Their discourse allows Everett, through James, to interrogate the hypocrisies embedded in the delivery of the Enlightenment, and therefore in American slavery. Voltaire tells James that he believes we are all equal, regardless of color, language, and habit. James counters with the instances in which Enlightenment thought has been used to justify racial hierarchies, and therefore slavery itself. He draws a direct line between the philosophy's justification and the South's reasoning. But the hallucinated version of Voltaire also states, however, you must realize that the climate and geography can be significant factors in determining human development. It's not that your features make you unequal, it's that they are signs of biological differences, things that have helped you survive in those hot, desolate places. It's those factors that stop you from achieving the more perfect human form found in Europe. The whole argument of Voltaire's is in that turn. We are all equal, regardless of color, language, and habit. However, the principle arrives and the exception arrives right behind it, in the same breath from the same mouth. Voltaire doesn't abandon the ideal of equality, he affirms it. And then he builds a trapdoor out of it. Climate, geography, biology. A set of conditions that just happen to place the more perfect human form in Europe, and just happen to place James outside of that. Equality is offered on terms that guarantee he can never satisfy them. And that's the hypocrisy at the heart of the whole thing. Slavery only required an amendment to the Enlightenment. All men are created equal, however. The exception is part of the men who misread their own philosophy, and it's sitting inside the philosophy in the hallucinated Voltaire's paragraph. Here's what James does with it. He hears the exception. He catches that word, however. When it reverses that equality, it's the same skill as earlier. Enemy, not oppressor. Equal, however. He's learned to read the fine print. He's owned in the same country that constructed this rhyme. The novel ends after James's odyssey through several stages of slavery, and he arrives at the logical conclusion of his story. For a character who has been called Jim, a diminutive, throughout the entire novel, the last page is a reckoning. As his old home burns around him, and he flees with his family, he's stopped by a sheriff who uses his name derogatorily. After the journey through literacy, understanding, and self-actualization, he's arrived at an ultimate conclusion. He throws off the mask. I am James, just James. He no longer uses the mask. He has progressed beyond it. And there's an irony we're sitting with. The declaration is a mental liberation, but the very act of unmasking is what makes him visible and therefore vulnerable to the sheriff. Early in the novel, his literacy endangered other people. By the end, it endangers him. The stakes rise as the literacy deepens. That's a significant change from Twain's Jim, and is ultimately a lesson for the reader about how we view the possibilities of American history. Everett draws on a tradition that has been telling us the same lesson for 180 years. In 1845, Douglass wrote a narrative about his own literacy and demonstrated the intellectual progression we see in James. In 1896, Paul Laurence Dunbar wrote a poem called We Wear the Mask. And then in 1903, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote about the veil, a self for the white world and another self kept behind it. This is Dunbar's original poem. We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile, with torn and bleeding hearts we smile, and mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should the world be overwise in counting all our tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. We smile, but O great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but oh, the clay is vile beneath our feet, and long the mile. But let the world dream otherwise. We wear the mask. Douglass, Dunbar, Du Bois, Everett is alluding to a whole tradition, and that allusion pushes James's bilingualism beyond this novel and into the past. It connects his characters to an existing historical narrative that runs parallel to the one in which Twain's myth lives. James the novel both is the story of the mask, and it tells us how it played out in Huck Finn and beyond. Twain gives Everett a useful symbol, but the story he tells is not a correction of Twain alone. It points to the broader ways we've been miseducated about our history and about our fellow Americans. We've had these lessons for 180 years. They've been anthologized, assigned, and taught. The keys are already in our hands. They form a literacy that exists only if we pick it up, though. So while Twain represents a failure that occurred in 1884, he also represents an excuse. For Twain, it was 1884. For us, the revelations have been at our fingertips the entire time. But have faith. We can still do it. That's what the lessons from reading are about. They make us more literate in our perceptions of the world. Here's the lesson from James. In the historical record, what we mistook for evidence of a lesser mind is actually evidence of a formidable one. It takes enormous skill to wear the mask every day, because failing once could get you killed. So when we say that the enslaved were not lesser, we're not being generous. We're actually being accurate. Enslaved people had to be bilingual. They lived several identities at once. They read every room they entered, calculated every audience, and taught their 5-year-olds, like in this novel, to do the same. Slavery demanded that the enslaved people be more sophisticated than the people who owned them, and then took that sophistication and pretended it didn't exist. The novel opens with a literacy lesson. James gathers children in a cabin and teaches them how to survive being misread. The novel ends by teaching us how to stop misreading. Same lesson, different classroom, and this time, we're the ones sitting on the floor. James wanted this so that he could write himself into being. Everett wrote James so we could finally read it. Last week, a man wrote himself into existence from a basement. That was Invisible Man. It's right here if you missed it. Next, we're going broader with the whole tradition of the African American novel. The essential 20 Black American novels, in fact. Thank you for watching. This has been Tilting at Tomes. I'm Ben.